Hello and welcome to Vikings and Muses, conversations that are uplifting between a man and a woman. I am Dylan Bain, and
I'm Anya Shack.
I think we're laughing because we we always kind of like chit chat a little bit before we hit record, and we decided to talk about population collapse as our starting point. And
Wow.
what we were talking about is we both listened to a podcast called Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson, which is amazing. You should totally go to go check it out. But he was talking. He's this is like his thing now, right? He's like obsessed with the idea the population's going to collapse because people aren't having enough kids, and he had made this statement in his Ask Me Anything, where he said that he thought that the first group of people to go extinct due to population collapse will be white liberals. So I think that's where we're going to pick that up.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. A lot of the white liberal females I know don't want kids. A lot of the more traditional conservative females I know want a whole bunch. So, like, is one, like, are the conservative females, like, helping the planet? Like, what? Yeah, like, I'm not sure. I also was actually having a great conversation with my cousin who lives in Tel Aviv, and they have a small 1-year-old, and they were talking about how the religious people there, the super Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, don't actually work. They don't contribute to society, but they have 12 to 13 kids, and so. Like she was saying, the religious people in the United States are very different. Like they still go to work, they still, try to at least participate in society. Whereas there in Israel, there's like a group of the population, which is the ultra religious, which actually just believe that them praying is doing enough good for society. That's all they need to do.
So what you're saying is Israel has actually institutionalized thoughts and prayers as an economic add into the economy.
I don't know how it works. I don't know. I mean, I guess the government is supplying them with food for their kids. I'm not sure how it works. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because I just with the area of the world that I live in and my men's group is populated by lots of Mormons.
Right.
And
Right.
they have that whole like beehive society where we're all worker bees and
Right.
it's always interesting to me because they have more kids than like if you look across the United States and from Chris Williamson's comments, I looked up the birth rates in all the states. The only one that is at replacement is Utah. In the entire United States, it's Utah.
Wait, that's
And
at replacement? What does that mean?
so so demographic collapse. If you're going to talk, if you look at the total population of women,
Okay.
and you say, okay, how many kids do I need each woman on average to
Okay.
have in order for my population to not shrink? The answer is
Yeah.
2.2.
Yeah.
Right? Now remember, it's
Okay.
averages, right? You're not going to have point 0.2
Sure.
of a kid. So, like in my household, we're below replacement because I have 2 kids with my wife, but I live with
Right.
2 women. So
Right.
we haven't replaced.
Right.
So if you look at what are the birth rates in different states, are they at that 2.2? And the answer is the only one that is Utah.
That's hilarious. The Mormons. Wait, I'm going to ask kind of a stupid question because I'm just going to take a bird's eye. We're talking about population collapse and now like the existential nature of that. But weren't we just talking about how there are too many people in the world? How are we going to feed all the people? Like there's too much, their population has grown exponentially. And what are we going to do? Like what was that narrative? And why this is the other narrative is now happening?
Yeah, I mean I can talk about that from an economic standpoint.
Okay.
Because you so like if you go back into the early 1800s, you have Thomas Malthus, right? And he's looking at the available land and the current technology and saying, there's a carrying capacity to the planet. And
Yeah.
what he didn't see was something called the Bessemer process, which allows us to create, and I think it's a Bessemer process, so maybe I got that wrong, but we could create nitrogen, which was great during World War I and II because we could create lots of bombs, but then afterwards we had the Green Revolution with fertilizers because the same inputs for fertilizer are the same inputs for bombs, which is an interesting thing. This is why, like, Oklahoma City in 1991, Timothy McVeigh, right? He didn't build a bomb, he just bought a bunch of fertilizer and used that. And he took
No
down a building.
shit.
Oh yeah, this is why if you're buying fertilizer, it requires a license, and they track how much fertilizer you buy in the United States. That's why.
Like plant fertilizer?
Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah. Like high nitrous at things are inputs into bombs.
Got it.
And
Okay.
so like after World War II, we ended up like we had built all this infrastructure to make this massive amount of chemicals for bombs that then could be used for fertilizer. And of course, all those businesses just went to the like selling to farmers. And then we exported that globally, which has caused crop yields to increase. So Thomas Malthus was not correct in saying that there's just a point in which humans can't continue to grow in population because of food, because the technology fixed it. And that caused this huge boom. Then the question was, well, at some point we are going to run out. Like, there's only so much technology can do. We don't know where that line is, but
Right.
there's a point. And so the speculation is we're starting to hit that point because population growth globally has started to slow.
I
So we're
see.
still growing. So we're at 8 billion people. We're still growing. Peter Zine talks about this all the time on his amazingly good YouTube channel called On Geopolitics. But we're slowing. And it looks like we're going to kind of crest at 10 billion.
Okay.
And there's no evidence that we're going to continue beyond that.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, because based on everything you're sharing, like the image I got, like from the media and from just the things that I've seen over the past, I guess, decade, was this idea of like we're over plowing the fields, like the Amazon is shrinking, like we're all of these things are happening, and this is due to there being too many people on the planet.
I mean, I think that there is something to say. Like I drive through Kansas quite a bit, and over the years, you had black topsoil, and now most of it's brown, which means you have
Okay.
soil degradation. There,
Right.
huge erosion, droughts. Like we are in a situation where there is some questions of whether or not global food production can keep up right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, there's so much waste, and it's heartbreaking, and there's so many hungry people.
Totally, totally. And I mean, right, I'm going to be going on a trip here soon, so like this, but for anyone listening, like I've been writing podcasts like crazy because I got to get them all recorded before I leave. And it's interesting because one of the questions when I look at an economic school is how do you handle homelessness? Like from an economic school standpoint, how do you view homelessness? And it's the same thing with food, right? Like you would think that from an economic standpoint, like we'd look at waste and then we want to have something, but we don't do it. And so like we do waste a ton of food, but the market's not stepping in to fix it.
Yeah. There's a lot of things like that going on. The market's not stepping in to fix it because it's not economically viable to step in and fix it.
I mean, we're getting a little field. I mean, there's a question of do market failures exist, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you think about like child labor, right? Is that the market would certainly use them, but if a kid gets his arm ripped off in a machine, that kid's no longer economically viable. There's no market solution to help him from that point forward, right? So long as you have a steady screen, like in in my heritage, my descendants built things like the Erie Canals and Eastern Railroads. Well, the policy for the companies that were building that was there's always going to be more Irishmen coming in. So there was no safety protocols. They did not care about employees. And as soon as one was burnt out, crippled, or useless, they'd be cast to the side and they just replace them. So like there's no economic incentive then to come back and fix that because it's going to take resources for what benefit.
Wow.
So, it's the same thing with food loss, and it's the same thing with farming. Like, it's in the farmer's economic best interest to continue to use these chemicals and pesticides and all this other stuff. And at the same time, the long-term game is they're killing the soil. We're running out of water in the aquifers.
Totally.
Climate change is a thing. And all of that together, like I said, really sunny topics here, but like all that together, gets into this big question of like, what do we do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think of like how overconsumption is a huge part of that conversation as well. If you think about the life, I guess the how long something lasts. It used to be a lot longer if you think about it, I guess. I think someone was telling me how, in the 70s or 80s, like people used to have a refrigerator for 20 years, and now a refrigerator breaks after 5 years, and like it's time to replace it but it's incentivized for the companies to not make things that last 20, 30 years. They want
Planned
repeat
obsolescence.
customers. Yeah, what's it called?
Planned obsolescence.
Yeah, and that's so sad. I mean, the iPhone is a great example, right? Like it's just clothes. Clothes are a great example. That like hits close to home for me because I went to fashion school. For those that didn't know, I studied men's fashion design in New York, and I studied from like old Italian masters of tailoring that like taught us all of the old school ways of creating clothing of the highest quality that would last you literally beyond your death. And nowhere can you find clothes like that now unless you're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
Totally.
yeah.
Well, but, I mean, this goes. I mean, like it's funny you bring up the refrigerator example. One of my freezers is from Montgomery Ward.
Okay.
It was built in the 1970s, and it's the best freezer, and it's more efficient than the modern ones I have. You know, and I have it for meat storage, but it still works.
Yeah.
You know, but like it doesn't last. But there's no economic incentive to do that,
Yeah.
right? Because if I provide you with a good that will last you the rest of your life, I've lost a customer.
I know.
You know, which is why when people like talk about market solutions, I'm not a Bolshevik or a communist or a Marxist by any extent of the mean, but I do feel like there's some realities like a healthcare system that's based upon market incentives has an incentive to keep everyone sick.
Totally.
You know, if you have an educational system where they're incentivized to make classify kids as disabled, they're going to do it, and they do it. Same with the food system, same with the car system, and there's tons of just different things that pervert it. And the same thing with population collapse. Like, it's not beneficial from a corporate standpoint for me to have more kids.
Yeah.
You know, in 10 years, they're going to be really hurting for workers. But, like, we already see this now with the worker shortages we're having right now. And we haven't even, we've crested and we're kind of coming down in the United States.
Yeah.
But we're not anywhere close to that.
So then why isn't it an economic incentive for you to have more kids?
Kids are expensive.
Yeah.
So
right
like,
now. Yeah, so it's like a short-term, long-term thing.
Well, even like my kids, I'm not paying tuition for my kids anymore. They go to a public charter school, but like,
sure,
they're still really expensive.
Yeah.
You know, and if I'm trying to prepare them to be economically viable, I have to give them all of these experiences. They got to be in sports, and they got to do dance, and they got to go to summer camp, and because that's what's going to be required for them to get the networking and all that other stuff. And like, it's tens of thousands of dollars more a year.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Of course.
And that doesn't even get into like I've always taken education seriously, and so when my kids were little, they went to really good preschools that were on the Montessori method.
Yeah.
Because that the results of the Montessori method are more or less undisputable, and I wanted them in that, but that also meant that I was cutting checks for $2,700 a month.
Totally.
To have them both in there. Now, you want me to have a third kid? Are you out of your mind?
Totally.
You know, and then that doesn't even get into, from the company standpoint, then they idle a worker, right? My wife, if she's pregnant, has a kid. They lose a worker. There's no maternity protections. I live in a car-dependent hellscape, so I can't walk anywhere. Taking my kids to the park is hard. There's no other kids in my neighborhood. Like, literally, I think I have the youngest kids within a 5-block radius of where I live.
Wow.
Like, I've never seen a kid younger than my youngest anywhere in the neighborhood. So like there's a culture that goes along with this too, that if you're not seeing people have kids, then you yourself probably won't think to have kids. Yeah,
of course.
And I think about like, you know, for me growing up there, my cousins were around and we were all the same age and stuff like that. Well, my kids have one cousin.
Yeah.
One cousin. That's it. And I've got myself and my brother, and my wife has 5 siblings, and they have one cousin.
Yeah.
And that cousin lives in St. Louis. So, like, they don't even see it. Whereas you back up one more generation to my wife's generation, you know, she has, I think there are 10 female cousins that were all born in the same year as her. You know, and her mom is one of 17 kids.
Totally.
You know, and they all had herds. Like,
Yeah.
it's a big problem.
Yeah. Interesting. So then you talk about the economic viability and, what you want to provide for your kids and like being able to afford all of the things that they need to be successful little people in the world and go on to be successful adults. The uber religious, like Roman Catholics and the uber religious Jews and the Muslim folks that, aren't these like millionaires, they're not thinking like that. They're having kids anyway. And they're not thinking like that. It seems like I'll give you an example. Like I have one of my closest friends from high school. She ended up moving to like rural Maine with her husband, and now she just had her fifth kid. And she's my age. She's 33. So I have no kids, and she has 5 already. So it's a fascinating comparison of our lives. And she's a stay-at-home mom, and he works. And, they're fine, but they're not rolling in money. And so there's a lot of sacrifices. There's a lot of hand-me-downs. There's a lot of that kind of mentality. And they think, to them, that's a good thing. To them, that's like a better way for a kid to grow up than to have all the things. And I guess they've moved to a rural place so they can find community of like-minded people, all of that. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on like the different mindsets of, I don't know, I guess upper middle class people versus the more religious people that have kids anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so there's I think one thing to point out. If my wife was on this call, she would be like ringing this bell as loud as she could. There's the ones you see and the ones you don't.
Okay.
Right? There's what you see on the outside, what's projected out, and what families are successful. Because once you start winning, you tend to keep winning. So you get, for example, one guy who's the most successful lawyer in Peoria, Illinois, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's got the money, and so it's not that big of a deal. And if you look at like Dominique's family, like every one of her uncles, every one of them is a doctor, a lawyer, a high, like they're all high level upper class people, and they had 8 kids, but they also live in a low income area. But their kids did the same. They stayed home, but there was also these built-in communities because they're from the Lebanese community in the middle of Illinois. Now what would have happened if one of them had, say, moved into a different area? Like, I don't know, my wife's parents. They moved out of that area. They lost that whole community, and they worked really hard, but that family is very dysfunctional. And they all decide, like, other than my wife, they've all decided, like, no, kids are a terrible idea. We don't want to do that because they saw what happened after they lost that community. And it's not to say that my in-laws didn't do everything they could. They absolutely did. But there's a darker side to that. The other question that I would have for you, like, oh, we're in rural Maine and we've got this other thing, like, there's a question of, yeah, you might be able to make that work right now. You've got, I'm assuming her husband is college educated.
Yeah.
So you've got an educated guy, probably doing remote work, can work out here, grew up in a more urban environment. Can they replicate that again in a rural environment? Can they take that and move it into their current context? And that's an open question. We don't actually know. We won't know for 20 years. It's not to say that, like, in my case, my kids had everything. Like, I was on food stamps for years.
Totally. Oh, of course, absolutely. I think this conversation is community based. Like, we're talking about community, and I think the main example, like, the nucleus of their community is the church. So we're talking about religious people and then not religious people.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, my wife's family is heavily religious.
Okay, right.
Like ridiculously so. Which is why I guess I didn't say that out loud. So
totally, because when you don't say it, you're like, okay, these like super just like regular people, like finding community, how, like, what's their community consist of? Well, if it's not religion, it's got to be something.
Totally. I mean, they're
Yeah.
they're Lebanese Americans living in Peoria, Illinois,
Right.
and they have this strong Lebanese like vein that runs through their entire community, and their church is like the focus of their, like, her grandmother has a life-size realistic replica of the crucifixion on the wall in their house. Like, it looks like they grabbed a white guy and nailed him up there.
Wow. So they're Lebanese Christians, not Lebanese Muslims.
Oh,
Okay.
they're Lebanese Catholic.
Ah, that's I. To be honest, I've never met a Lebanese Catholic. Yeah.
They're a fascinating bunch.
Yeah.
Like they're straight up like can trace their origins back to the Crusader states. Like,
Wow.
so there's this heavily Catholic enclave in Lebanon that's there, and they have they're not like Roman Catholic is what everyone thinks of.
Totally.
The Roman part is just the different sect. The Catholic is the overall corporate umbrella.
Yeah.
So, like, they're Maronite Catholic. They're not Roman Catholic.
Right.
And there's a huge difference. So their masses are different. Their traditions are different. Their priests can be married.
Right.
Always interesting when, this random Lebanese guy shows up at, my wife's
Yeah.
family functions. He's trolling
Yeah.
for women before he takes his holy orders.
Oh my God.
it's
That's
it's very
crazy.
fascinating.
Oh, I
Highly
have I
xenophobic.
have a tangent after you're done talking about this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so they are heavily religious, but there is this culture that goes through it, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with them, and I've seen it with the Mormons of like, you do this, there's a heavily structured, there's a template that every family's supposed to be built on. This is how you
Yeah.
do things. Like, and I feel like that software is so ingrained in them that it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's really interesting. I was thinking about priests because and then I was thinking about one of my favorite things that I watched when I was like a teenager with my mom. We spent an entire weekend watching the Thornbirds. Do you know what the Thornbirds is?
The cartoon?
No. It's not a
Okay,
cartoon.
then no, I don't.
It's like one of the oldest first ever like mini-series romance dramas that was like a 13 episode thing. And it's basically set in the outback of Australia, and it's about this priest who's really in love with this little girl as she's like grown up and like in love with her as a woman and all this stuff. And it's just this dramatic story. It's like, anyway. Oh my God, the Thornbirds. I'd say that's your quintessential like romance thing.
I will
Yeah.
have to take your word for it because
Yeah.
or I go look it up. But romance
look
isn't
it up.
necessarily what I dig by myself.
Totally.
Yeah, but it is interesting because like in of the women on Dominique's level in that family, she has the least number of kids.
Yeah.
She's also the only one who ever completed a degree.
Right. So interesting.
Like, in fact, for her, it was kind of a scandal because she went to a Catholic university and went and pursued an engineering degree, and then, gasp, she graduated. And the whole thing was like, well, why would you go there if not to find a man to settle down with?
For sure. For
You know,
sure, for sure.
you're like, that was the thought, and that
For sure.
and she actually had men who would proposition her with like, no, I'll take care of everything. You can stay home with the kids. Like, she had
Totally.
that.
Totally.
So then in her family, they were like, well, she just got short hair and she didn't get married, so you all know what that means. So everybody was very relieved when I showed up, and then we're very sad when I didn't leave because I'm not Catholic and I'm white. So,
You had to sit at the other picnic, the other table with all
to
the other
sit at the outlaw
people.
table, yeah.
Outlaw table, yeah. That's wild. No, I get it. It's really interesting. I don't know. I'm wrestling with these things. I know we're moving kind of topics a little bit, but this friend of mine in Maine, like, I have more in common with her than I do a lot of my other friends. But I don't have anything in common with her. I think I just emotionally have more in common with her. Like, I see myself more connected to her values than I do my like white liberal friend who doesn't want to have kids. 'Cause
Right,
she's,
who
like,
thinks
pessimistic
she
about
has
the
a fur
future.
baby.
The fur baby girl. Yeah, it's like, I have a cat too, but like, it's just a cat.
It's a cat.
It's an animal. It's not a human child. So I think it's interesting. I don't know. The whole population collapse thing. I think I had a weird week. I spent way too much time diving into the depths of like weird internet negativity, pessimism.
Well, there's your problem.
This is what happened to me this week. It's like everything's like terrible. Everything's horrible. People are terrible. Everything's like the worst, and all kinds of nonsense is happening on the streets, and people are stabbing each other, and people are, just.
What's a little light stabbing among friends? Come on.
Thank you for making that joke.
I mean,
yeah. Anywho.
You'll feel no pain while they drive you insane if you just stay on the sunny side of life, right?
Well, this is what I said once. I said this when we were talking about gun control. I was like, if it's not the guns, it'll be something else. It's not about the guns, And then here we go. A man stabs children in a playground in Paris this week.
Totally. I mean, I think. I mean, I've been saying this for years at this point that there's an economic incentive to sell fear, outrage, and xenophobia.
Yeah.
It sells.
Yeah.
And without things like the fairness doctrine in place, you just are constantly it's like a drug. Like you're constantly turning up the temperature, and like you say, what was an outlandish statement 10 years ago is like, God, pick a side, bro. Now.
Totally.
And I mean, particularly with guns is a great place to see this, but like, to me, it just comes down to. It's the breakdown of social society. In this country, specifically in the United States, we're so afraid of we're still suffering from the aftershocks of the Red Scare, where like the idea that like collectivism, social stuff, that's all bad. It's all individuals. Well, now I atomized ourselves into individuals, and now we're all going insane because we're not supposed to be alone.
You're amazing. What you just said was incredible. Very well said.
Like, wow. I always think about that because you asked me one time, like, what's with the roommate? I was like, well, I've always lived with a roommate. It's always been a thing. When I moved back to the United States, it was my wife and our maid of honor from our wedding lived with us. And then for a while it was her sister, and now it's our friend who lives with us. And, if she were to go somewhere, we'd probably find somebody else. Human beings are meant to be and live in community, and I think on some levels, when you talk about I think I have emotional connection to my friend in Maine, that makes sense to me. On some levels, she's living, not totally, but it rhymes with what you say you're looking for.
Totally.
And quite frankly, it does for me too. I'm no longer Catholic, but I miss the church because I miss the built-in community and sense of belonging.
Yeah. I think that's so well put, and it's just. I think we downplay how much the individualism is affecting us. Like, even me this week, I have groups and I have coaches and I've gone to therapy and I'm trying to be aware of myself. And even I get extremely anxious very often about the state of the world and just all of the info and media and stuff that's coming at me. I can't imagine someone that's not aware, that's not, able to say, okay, I need to just take a moment. I need to meditate. I need to sit, close my eyes. I just feel for people that are kind of just surviving and not sure how to handle it or not sure how to fix it or just kind of stuck in the middle of it all. And I think it's just why there's so much chaos going on, especially in this country. It feels really scary to me, just how much we have, I don't know, just how far it's all gone. So,
yeah, I've made the argument a number of times that I think it's important in modern society to understand the motivations of people talking. Mm-hmm. And this is why, all media sources, I always ask that question, what's their goal? Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're as separate as we think we are.
Okay.
I just don't think we are. I think at the end of the day, we have far more in common
Yeah.
And people are taking the very small things and then turning them into just outrageous statements. And
Yeah.
then they basically found a crack, got the biggest lever they could, and are trying to wedge it open.
Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, it's like the abortion debate. Yeah, there are crazies on both sides of that debate. But
Totally.
for the vast majority of people in this country, you know, like, I've met very few people who aren't like, yeah, first trimester, half of the second trimester, that seems reasonable. By the time we get to the third trimester, we probably should have a really good reason. Like, I feel like that's a
Saying
pretty,
logical.
yeah, I feel like it's a pretty logical thing. Because they're like, well, but it's always, you know, but when you take the extreme position of like, it's a person from conception, it's like, that flies in the face of thousands of years of human understanding and history. You know, you get into these discussions, and you once you have this calcified position, you can't talk to them anymore. But there are so few people who are actually in that position.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay. All right. I have something that's kind of slightly controversial, but let's do it anyway. It's
The
based...
population collapse.
No, it goes literally right with what you're talking about right now in the like the far sides of things. So I'm having a problem actually. Okay. And this is something that I have thought about this week, and I'm working out how to deal with it in a sane, logical, rational way.
Okay.
So like I know somebody that I respect and admire a lot. You know about this person. I've talked to this person. They used to be a coach of mine. And this person has helped me tremendously in life, right? And like we'll always love, honor, and respect them. I have this like very clear viewpoint on like how porn is not great for society. How it's like messing with guys, it's messing with women, it's messing with relationships. Like I just have this like very clear value that I believe in, where I just think that porn is no good. Porn is no good. And this person actually like sustains their livelihood through porn. So it's like really hard for me to, I'm literally just like sharing all the things, but it's really hard for me to square this whole idea of like admiring and respecting this person for what they've done for me and for the exchanges that we've had up until this point, and then being able to, you know, like respect them for this thing that I so deeply don't believe in. And it's a really hard thing to do. Like when you're talking about two sides of one issue, you're talking about the logical, sane, rational middle, you're talking about the extremes. It's like, I don't know how to deal with this. This is really hard for me.
What's my role here?
I'm just sharing that I think it's maybe I'm meant to just be a little more courageous in that, like, if I need to, I think what my problem is that I want to share more about my viewpoints on my social platforms, specifically around this, like, porn is not great, it's not helpful for men, all this stuff. And I think because I see this man as kind of a father figure, I think that if I do it, like, I'll get in trouble, or, like, he'll be mad at me, or I won't have done the right thing.
Yeah. If he's mad at you, then what? Does it? I mean that doesn't undo any of the good things that he's helped you with, but it does mean that you two are on divergent paths from this point forward.
Totally.
Like it.
Yep.
I'm a big believer that everybody's got a piece of the truth.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you think about, and I think about like a chair, right?
Yeah.
We could suspend a chair in space as a central point and then organize people around it.
Okay.
You know, they're all going to look at the chair, but they're going to see something radically different.
Okay.
Right? So if you're looking from the bottom, it just looks like a square with, you know, some points on the side of it. But if you're looking from the top, you don't even see the points anymore, right? So if you have two people on other sides of that trying to describe what it looks like, they're going to get in an argument because it's outside their viewpoint. The point being is that everyone's got a piece, so if you actually want to understand the truth, that is the chair, then you'd have to understand that everyone's going to have a piece of it, but they're not going to have the complete picture. And I think about this with like David Data and The Way of the Superior Man.
That's right.
That is a book where you read, like, when you read it as a young man, you're like, oh my god, this book's amazing.
Totally.
But then as you deal with your shadow and you work on yourself and you find yourselves in relationship, and then you reread it and you realize parts of it are deeply aligned and parts of it are utterly abusive.
Yeah, you
And
shared that with me before. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you look at it and go like, well, do I have to throw the whole book out?
Right.
No.
Right.
No, I really should, as I've learned more, as I've expanded my nervous system, as my understanding, my heart, my ability to crack into my heart space,
Yep.
to look back at it and go, his relationship with women is clearly wounded. I
Sure.
can see that. I can see why I liked it, because it matched what I thought was the way out of my own wounding, what I've learned different.
Sure.
And I'm glad for what it did for me in my time, but it's time to put it down and move on. And I feel like that's the same thing with somebody like Jordan B. Peterson. So much of Jordan B. Peterson's work is just unbelievably amazing. He's dad for so many men.
For so many.
But at the same time, he's, particularly since he's joined the Daily Wire, like, he's kind of slid off into, like, some weird la la land. And it's like, hey, bro, we need you. Like, come back to the light here.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, like, I don't need to believe everything he says to understand that when he's dropping truth.
Totally. It's a good
And
point.
so there's a
Love
huge difference between, like, what lands inside of my body and rings with the ring of truth versus what's just emotionally thematic that just makes me like, yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, it's such a great point. I love that. It's such a great point. Yeah. And I think in this journey I've been going through the last couple months of just like shedding some old layers, some awakening, just learning to be more courageous. Speaking of my own truth is just a very profound place to be. And especially if like a dad figure doesn't like it or it's not aligned to what they believe. That's really, I think, going to be a powerful unlock for me. 'Cause I've always tried to please like authority male figures in my life. So, yeah.
Let me ask you this. It's not him that's making the money in porn, it's his wife, isn't it?
It's both of them together.
Do we have any idea how comfortable he is with it?
Yes. He
Okay.
loves it. He inspired it to begin.
Yeah, so just speaking as a man, so I agree with you 100% on the porn is a bad thing. And I'm not anti-sex by any extent of the mean. What I am though is I draw very clear lines on like intentionality is key here, and the energetic charge of things matter, right?
Yeah.
And so what I would say here, like with so much porn, it's so performative, it's so unrealistic, it's so foreshortened and twisted that I can't get there where I'm like, yes, this is a needed man, a part of every young man's life. Like, I just don't think it is. So like when I hear of a man who's like, yes, I wish my wife to be in porn.
Yeah.
My whole thing is like, have you grown up enough that you realize that's not a good thing for connection?
Yeah.
Like, to me, it just strikes myself so much as an immature part of the masculine. Not to say that there aren't other extremely mature pieces, right?
Totally.
But my question for him would around sex, like, if we really dug into it, are we playing out boyish fantasies that he's never actually matured into?
Yeah. There's so much around that is like so many levels, so many layers of that. I also think there's desires for polyamory, right? Like there's a lot there that is fueling a lot of that stuff. So I think, again, just like a value misalignment. Wonderful human being has like a lovely heart, but just like value misalignment from my own. And so it's just, yeah, and great questions to ask. But yeah.
Yeah, this idea had came to me about it a while ago. I was mentoring a young man who was talking about porn and in its role in his relationship.
Yep.
Essentially, what had happened was his girlfriend had informed him that she views it as cheating, and
Oh, okay.
he didn't take it well.
Okay. Interesting.
So we're having this conversation. One of the things that I was trying to explain to him is that he was like, what's the difference between, sex that boys have versus sex that men have? And I didn't have a good answer. And later I think the difference is consumption versus connection. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, so much of immature sexuality in my mind is about consuming something. You're consuming her, you're consuming her energy, you're consuming a moment. It's a chintzy once you've consumed it, she's no longer interesting, right?
Totally.
I had a friend who in college who used to say all the time of like, if she's not interesting, take her home and get it over with. And his whole thing was like, you just consume it and you're done. It was a nice snack and then move on. And we even talk about that like, oh, that's a snack. Like, I'm not a snack, I'm a man. Not that anyone's ever called me that. But I think that's the difference, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I think when you cross into porn, there's a consumption aspect to it that starts occurring.
I mean, what are we talking about for the whole beginning? Like consumption, the West, like the Western ideas of consumption and just how we've become this like overconsumption society. And so sex is a huge part of that. Sex is a huge part of that. Surface level sex up for consumption, whereas never actually getting into what the deeper levels of sex are and like what's there for people. So, but it's not as economically viable to have people think of sex in the way of connection. So,
no, it's not. I mean, like, oh my God, the economics of sex are something that I wish I knew. I had a better understanding because I'm always kind of like shooting from the hip on that. But like they used to say that sex sells, and at this point it's outrage porn, but it's still porn.
It's totally out. Yeah, it's like such a great point. Yeah, it's really dark. It gets really dark really quickly because like it's dopamine, right? And so you need different and more intense and more insane, more outrageous, and it just all needs to keep getting more. And so, yeah, there's so much there. I don't know what to do about the porn industry.
Well, I don't think there's anything to do with it, but like, to me, I feel like we're circling around a topic somewhere, and I'm not and I don't know what that topic is, but I don't know. To me, there's just so much of it of like, I feel like the instinct is like, let's just judge this, that shouldn't be, and then we oscillate between wanting to judge because it makes us feel good, and then not wanting to be judgmental.
Right.
And to me, it's all, to me, it always goes back to what's the pro-human thing, right? Sure. I don't think porn is pro-human.
Yeah. Exactly.
And on a lot of levels, I don't think polyamory is necessarily pro-human, although that's a whole topic for a different time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have to agree with you. I think we get into the spectrum, like, right? The spectrum of woman as, like, what's the difference between a muse and a snack, right? It's really different. These are really different things. So if you think about, like, Playboy and, like, the old original magazines, and you would see these beautiful women, and you would see, like, I remember, like, my grandpa had, like, cards with, like, naked women on them, and, like, it was just like, and some of them weren't even naked. Some of them were just, like, suggesting, right? It was just a shoulder, and then they were kind of covered. It was just the side. It was like a profile. And that was enough for a man to keep in his wallet, just a not naked woman, just the suggestion that she could be naked if she moved her hands. And so I think that's, and then you think of Sophia Loren, and then you think of Marilyn, and then you think of Rita Hayworth, and just beautiful women from the past. And
Aubrey Hepburn. That one picture from Breakfast at Tiffany's is like the definition of smolder.
Yes, smolder. I haven't heard the word smoldering in a long time. I like that word.
Oh my god. Well, but like that's just it. Like right, now it's like here's my tits versus like there's nothing
Yeah.
secret, there's nothing alluring, there's nothing attractive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's why I just it's like that's why I love that we talk about these things and we try to kind of make our way towards the middle, because you'll take like the super traditional over the top right and they'll just be like, no, no nakedness, no showing of skin, like no. And that's not it either. Like, we want women to be able to express the essence of their beauty out in the world, but like, what does that look like? And it's not porn. It's not cheap porn. It's not OnlyFans where, you know, check out my tits for the cost of a sandwich and a soda. It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, and why would you pay for that when there's plenty on the internet? It's just always like the business model has always been weird to me. Although
The
I did have
girlfriend
one guy.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the difference between married men and non-married men. Non-married men always want the girlfriend experience. Married men want the porn star experience.
Yes.
Like, what?
Yes.
I guess it makes sense.
Makes sense.
But I was having this conversation with a friend of mine where he was talking about, the pro-life position's actually very anti-life because they're not about sex, right? They're all about, like, she got pregnant, now she has to deal with the consequences. Like, it's a punitive punishment thing. And they're so afraid of sex, any sexuality, any porn, he calls it. He says like that's an anti-life position because they hate how you make more life. And I said, well, so does that mean that then the pro-porn position is inherently pro-life? And he was like, no, they're commodified. So like where our options are anti-life or commodification, and we don't seem to understand that these two things aren't even on the same spectrum. Like,
Oh, interesting way to look at it.
yeah, and so his whole point is that like it's not that there's this tension between the spectrums because they're not on the same spectrum.
Yeah.
They're just different ways
Yeah.
of dehumanization.
Totally. Absolutely. This is why, like, the guy that I had on Venus and Mars, Nakula Das, who's like the NoFap guy, which I loved listening to him. And his whole thing was like, this might sound really simple, but like, the answer is falling in love and having sacred sex. And hey, here's an idea: learning how to utilize like tantric principles, learning how to not ejaculate for 90 days, like learning how to give your wife pleasure, no matter what. And he was just like, sacred sex, like, of course. And then the question then is like, why aren't more men trying to become the type of man who could get this, who could have this?
This reminds me so much of the yeah. Yes to all that mostly.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
there is there was a guy who was in my battle team in my men's group, and we break things into 4 quadrants for every quarter and have goals for each quadrant. One of the quadrants is connection.
Okay.
The whole point is like, what are you doing to connect with the people in your life? And it doesn't have to be romantic partners, but it can be kids or your wife or your girlfriend. Or are you trying to meet women and just have a conversation? Are you trying to spend more time with your guy friends? So like all these things. He comes rolling into the team and he's like, I got the perfect connection. And he's like, I'm going to bang a different girl every week. And we all just kind of looked at him and were like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And this led to this entire conversation. He was like, well, I want to grow I want to have a powerful connection. I'm going to come in, I'm going to penetrate with my presence, and then I'm going to find a different girl every week. And I'm like, you are like this close to a sexual predator, my friend. Let's have a conversation. And him and I were me and a couple other guys decided that this was a grenade we were all going to fall on, because we were like, we cannot let him go. He's going to become dangerous. And so we're talking to him. And his whole thing was that he didn't feel powerful in connection. And so he felt that if he can consume enough, then he would be powerful. And my whole thing was like, true power in a sexual relationship is the ability to play her like an instrument. Mm-hmm. Like, do you know how to turn around with the tip of your finger? And I'm not talking about in androgynous areas. Mm-hmm. Like, do you understand her enough? Can you create enough of soft structure around her to just let her be? And she's already turned on. Mm-hmm. Like, and he's like, no, that's not power. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh,
And to me, it just
yeah.
comes down to like the act of being able to just knock something off on the bedpost it is a very tangible, calculated thing that's
Yeah.
fairly easy to do if you
Yeah.
look the right way.
So easy.
Whereas learning about her body and learning
Yeah.
about how where her sexuality is, or learning how to read her, or learning how to hold yourself strong enough that she can feel safe, those are harder things because that's going to
Mm-hmm.
challenge you to have to look inside yourself first.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course there be dragons. So like I love what this man is
Yeah.
saying, but
Yeah.
it kind of is like,
Good
well, yeah,
point.
that's one good point to look at, and I think that there's other parts that go with it.
I love it. This just kind of clarifies everything. Like, why are why are men why are we consuming so much? Why is there so much overconsumption? Because people believe, men namely, believe that the more they consume, the more powerful they'll feel. So it seems like that's probably where the connection lies. And they don't have solid male role models to show them what true power looks like, which is what you just kind of described. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, we were unsuccessful, by the way.
Oh,
He
really? He still
yeah
went out
he
and did his thing?
well he went out and did his thing, and he was so proud of it, and he was like, I accomplished something. And I had to point out to him, I was like, the most amazing thing about this was not that you were able to do it. It was the fact that you were able to do it while still living in your mom's basement without a job. That is the impressive part of this. And he was like, well, I don't need that. I'm clearly more successful than you. And I was like, are you now?
That just goes so far as to show us how far women have gone away from their power.
Oh, totally. There are no innocents here.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. It's a both two to tango in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I think we've overcomplicated life to a point where women just don't realize how powerful sex is,
Totally.
and how
I mean,
giving it away is just, yeah.
I think it all goes right back to the like we pushed against what you like you. I think you did a great job, illustrating it of the traditional no 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 no, right? Having to break out of that box and actually allow the feminine to come out of it and be.
Yeah.
And then of course that got commodified, and everybody thought we focused on, well, how do we make you more like a man? You should work like a man. You should fuck like a man. How do you sleep with a guy and not catch feels? Like,
Totally. Totally.
my problem has always been I can't sleep with a woman and not catch feels. So like, how are you supposed to do it?
Dude. Literally 17 heartbreaks back to back in my 20s. So, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just wild. It's just super wild. Yeah. Then I think to myself, like, how. I do think that, you know, both men and women, we're doing a lot of great things where a lot of us are kind of working on ourselves and trying to shift and change. But it really is like the masculine that is kind of at the center of making a change. Because like if that dude went into himself, the one that banged all those girls, if he like took a look at himself, changed his ways, found his own, like slayed some of the dragons that are creeping in his mind, found his true confidence, awakened some of that, and then was able to start making women feel safe, he could just like, I mean, he could just make women feel so happy just being in their presence.
Totally.
And like that's actually power.
Totally.
Yeah.
Power is the ability to influence and be influenced by others.
Yep. Yep. I
You
love
know,
that.
and to me, he's a tragedy because he's so smart. He's way smarter than I
Yeah.
am. And he would always come up. He would concoct these like completely solid, unassailable, logical formations, and it was like, yes, but I still have what you want. Like at the end of the day, you can say about Plato and Aristotle and red pill this and mating strategies that, but at the end of the day, I have what you want. I have a wife and a family and a successful career.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, you're right, and I'm successful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you think for a man like that, having like having a space with a woman would be helpful for him? Like in a coaching scenario? I'm just curious because I'm thinking a lot about like, there are a lot of men that coach men. It's amazing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
men can teach men masculinity. That's how it works. There are a lot of women coaching women, women helping women find themselves, open themselves up. There are also a lot of men coaching women, right? Like a lot. That happens all the time, whether it's kind of reimagining father wounds and healing them or whatever. There are not a lot of women coaching men. And this has been something I've been thinking about, like the types of men that want coaching from women, that like want to feel seen, and that what I've noticed from some of the men that I've coached and that I've interacted with, what it comes down to is the woman is able to kind of shine a light on some of the hidden aspects of their masculinity, of who they are, some of the hidden aspects of like their heart, what they really believe. It's just like a softer approach that a man couldn't do with them. And I'm wondering if that's beneficial for some men, or you think it's just not beneficial. They need like men's work and then they're going to be fine. I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, my argument would be that sounds amazing for like
Yeah.
level 3.
I
don't
see.
think I don't think that that's a starting gate thing.
Yeah, totally.
If for no other reason, and I've worked with starting gate guys, right? Like a lot of guys in my men's group are that,
Yeah.
and you start pulling at it and it explodes.
Yeah.
That is not something that I would want to put a woman into that position. I don't think she would know what to do with it because she couldn't relate to it. Where it's just
sure.
like, oh yeah, I know this one. I have the same monster.
For sure.
You know, we'll let your monster play with my monster, and then we're gonna have a conversation, right? Like, so I think that it would be really useful, but I don't think it's the first step. And I think if there's a man who's looking for the first step, I would say the wounding's he's probably trying to avoid something.
Yeah, makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
You know, it's like you don't just skip and go to Connor Beaton right away, right?
Right.
you,
Right.
you there's a couple other steps and links in that chain before you end up at his feed.
Yeah. That's a good
And
point.
you know, but it's also the thing of like men typically don't ask for help, and so I
Right.
don't know, there isn't as much of a population that I think would be out there, and the ones who need it most are the ones least likely to take it.
Yeah, it's true. It's
So like
interesting.
for this guy, for example, like his biggest thing is that he's intellectualized to the point where that's his protection.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a man who is free never has to find himself in a defensive position.
Yeah, true. It's a good point. That's a really well said thing. You've said so many great like one-liners today.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Wow.
Cool. Well, we can cut it there because I was
Yeah.
like, you cut it on the praise for Dylan. Great.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, y'all.